the boy skipped class with his girlfriend. Instead of going to the female teacher for extra tutoring, they were stopped by the professor. Their car was overturned, and the girlfriend was taken away. The boy wanted to kill that old woman. York had escaped with Amy from Jerry in the past, but now in college, the gap and crisis of trust between them has resurfaced. On the study trip to Romania, Amy and York decided to break up, which made York very gloomy. York rejected Eddie's party invitation, and planned to watch a movie in his room, but when he looked up, he accidentally saw two hot women in the apartment across performing even more stimulating scenes, which excited him greatly. If it weren't for him peeking, he even thought of whistling. Just then, the person across seemed to have noticed him, but she didn't panic. Instead, she revealed a smile of enjoyment. Good things shouldn't forget his good friends. York quickly called out to Eddie, inviting him to take a look, but in the time of turning around, the two beautiful women across had disappeared. Eddie only saw the statues on the opposite building. He thought York was mentally unstable, so he muttered a few disdainful words to York. Just at that moment, a knock on the door came from outside. It turned out to be the teacher informing them to gather in the hall in 10 minutes. The first lesson of the study trip is tonight. At the same time, next to a small gas station in the outskirts of Romania, a girl is sending messages in the car, unaware that danger has already arrived. The next moment, the car window glass is shattered. An unidentifiable dark figure tried to rush in. The girl, terrified by this sudden change, can only scream. She wants to escape from the other side of the car, but she's too frightened. Her hands and feet are unresponsive. The car door is right in front of her, but she can't open it no matter what she did. Just at that moment, the dark figure touches the hanging ornament inside the car. It's a pure silver crucifix. In a brief contact, it causes immense pain to the figure. White smoke emanates from the touched area. This temporarily scares off the dark figure. It begins to damage outside the car. The girl sees the dark figure leaving the car, but the dark figure is smashing the car. She calms down a bit and starts seeking help. But this is the suburbs. No one responds to her. The girl sees through the rearview mirror. Her car is leaking oil. The gasoline in the fuel tank is gushing like a fountain. She realizes she must leave quickly. Otherwise, the car will explode. She will surely have no place to escape. Just before the monster smashes the car roof, the girl escapes from the car door. The monster crouches on the car, staring at her. Just as it was about to pounce on her, it sees a lit lighter thrown into the gasoline. The gasoline on the ground instantly ignites. The fire quickly engulfs the car, as well as the dark shadow monster on top, and then ignites the gas pump. The explosion creates a shockwave, which throws the girl away, and she crashes into the wall of a convenience store. However, that dark shadow seems to have suffered little damage. It walks steadily towards her. Although the girl is seriously injured, her whole body is in pain. The desire to survive is even stronger. She walks into the convenience store, trying to seek help. It's a 24-hour unmanned convenience store. There are no store attendants. The only surveillance device is a CCTV camera. The girl wants to make a phone call for help. The next moment, a figure appears behind her. It grabs her by the neck and lifts her up, and throws her away. She crashes into two shelves before stopping. However, all of this, in the surveillance footage, there is only the girl throughout. There is no dark figure at all. The other party seems to be taunting the uselessness of the surveillance. The dark figure drags the woman below the camera. Suddenly, the sound of tearing flesh is heard. Blood gushes out, soaking the crucifix on her chest. On the other side, amidst the dazzling lights, a female professor walks in. She is Professor Jerry, the teacher for this class. In the upcoming week, she will teach the students about medieval art and the related aspects of medieval art. Yet, York in the audience is stunned. He recognized her. This professor, whom he saw in the apartment just now, was one of the dancers from the hot dance duo. He had doubts in his mind. Can she really do it? Perhaps sensing his gaze, Professor Jerry also stares at him from the crowd. Clearly, she also recognized York. After a brief introduction in the classroom, the professor takes them to a local castle for field observation and study. This is the castle of Countess Elizabeth. She was extremely cruel during her rule, killing countless people, and even became one of the inspirations for the vampire Dracula. And from the tour guide's narration, everyone learns the people who were killed were mostly women. York disregards these stories. He has already seen real vampires. They are beings who don't care about gender. So he found an excuse to explore the interior of the castle. But in a corner, he heard some voices. He was at the age of adolescence. Those voices were appealing to him. He followed the voices. York turned into an unfamiliar place. Here, he saw a couple. As he observed them closely, That woman turned out to be Jerry. Perhaps it was a woman's intuition. The observed professor instantly turned her head and looked directly at where York was and pronounced his name. York got scared. He quickly stepped back to the side and hid behind a pillar, trying not to make any sound. But the next moment, all the sounds suddenly disappeared. York quickly came out from behind the pillar, but just like in the apartment, everyone had vanished, as if nothing had happened here. He walked up to investigate. He saw a staircase. Could the couple have left through the staircase? So he wanted to go downstairs and search, but right at that moment, a hand tapped his shoulder. York got startled. Upon closer look, it turned out to be his friend Eddie. It turned out the tour was about to end. He came specifically to inform York that it was time to leave. Back at the apartment, after experiencing two strange incidents just now, this feeling was very unpleasant. It reminded York of some bad memories, so he stayed awake all night, tossing and turning in bed. Suddenly, the door was pushed open. The teacher in charge informed them they were to gather for class in half an hour. The classroom lights were still dazzling, yet everyone's gaze was unusually blank. Jerry was narrating, while slowly approaching Amy. Having experienced two strange incidents last night, York was now wary of the professor. Upon seeing her approaching Amy, with strange movements, as if a wild animal habitually take a sniff before eating, he spoke up to stop her. Yet a bizarre scene unfolded. Everyone around was frozen. No one paid attention to him. They didn't even blink their eyes. Amy remained in the same position. Only Jerry and York could move. Then the professor turned her head and stared at him. He became aware of the strangeness around him. York awkwardly tried to defend himself. Jerry slit Amy's throat, splattering blood directly sprayed into York's eyes. Extreme fear jolted him awake. It turned out to be just a dream. He had actually fallen asleep in class, and he got caught red-handed by the teacher. He instantly became a laughingstock, but the professor seemed to know the content of the dream. She quietly asked him in his ear, "Do you like this kind of content?" York's eyes filled with horror. Now he was certain. This woman definitely had a problem. Even after class, he proactively told Eddie, "The professor is definitely not normal." But the other person didn't believe him at all. Instead, he believed York was mentally unstable and planned to confront the professor, even though she was indeed extremely attractive, being mocked by Eddie for a long time. Upon returning to the apartment, York encountered a police investigation. Through conversations with people around, he came to understand one of them had gone missing, and the person in that photo was the man who was with Jerry last night. A sense of crisis emerged in York's heart. He returned to his room and stared at the professor's room. Then he witnessed an even more shocking scene. The professor actually jumped from the 8th floor, carrying a body bag on her back, and she landed smoothly in the end. In front of the police, she stuffed the bag into the car and swiftly left. York wanted to stop the police car and make them chase after the professor, but the police didn't even look at him. They accelerated and drove away. York decided to take matters into his own hands. He climbed up to the 8th floor and climbed into the professor's house through the window. The whole room was an eerie purple color. Upon careful observation, it could be seen all the doors and windows were made with ultraviolet isolation film. While the professor was absent, York carefully searched the place. The first thing that caught his eye was a massive self-portrait. The woman's makeup was somewhat strange. It appeared to be from the medieval period. Just as he was about to explore further, he heard the sound of a door opening outside. Startled, York quickly hid. He accidentally triggered a mysterious mechanism. The entire bookshelf turned out to be a hidden door, revealing a secret passage behind it. Holding a flashlight, he walked inside. All around him were ticking sounds of clocks. Upon closer inspection, both walls were covered with clocks, ranging from medieval to modern digital clocks. Already on edge, York was overwhelmed by the noise, to the point of almost losing his sanity. He quickly reached the end of the passage. There were only two things here. One was a massive, ornate coffin. The other was a golden bathtub. The glittering gold attracted York's attention, but before he could approach, he caught a strong scent of blood. Upon closer inspection, the entire bathtub was filled with fresh blood. This terrified him, but he didn't have time to think. The sound behind him was getting closer. In a panic, York hid inside a nearby coffin. It was here that he witnessed an even more astonishing scene. Through the gaps in the coffin, York saw a young woman voluntarily undressing. Across from her was an old woman with wrinkled face. The old woman emitted strange sounds from her mouth, as if chanting some kind of spell. The woman in front of her became increasingly peculiar. She became immensely excited. Suddenly, a wound appeared on her neck. The old woman grew fangs, letting out growls. In a certain moment, the woman's neck started gushing blood. Only then did she regain composure. She tried to stop it with her hands, but it was already too late. Inside the coffin, York observed everything. He could only cover his mouth and nose to prevent himself from making any sound, fearful that he might be next. The old woman suspended the girl upside down in the bathtub, while blood was being poured. She continued chanting spells, until the blood completely drained. Then the old woman stepped into the pool of blood. When she emerged again, she had transformed into Jerry. She absorbed all the blood on her body. Her skin tightened from being loose. York wanted to take a photo to document it, but he realized there was no one in the frame. He muttered angrily, but at that moment, the professor opened the coffin directly. There was only 1 centimeter of distance between them. He could even feel Jerry's breath. At this moment, York was filled with fear. He had no intention to admire the beauty. In the instant of the camera flash, York quickly ran out of the professor's house. He called the police from a telephone booth on the roadside, but the police thought he was just a madman. They hung up on him on the spot, and all of this was under the professor's gaze. She smiled. York was being stared at, making him uncomfortable. He immediately fled from the telephone booth. He went to find his girlfriend, Amy, but Jerry was already waiting for him there. He was worried that the professor would harm his girlfriend. York said Jerry was a vampire, and presented a Bible, trying to intimidate her. However, the professor showed no fear. She took the Bible from him. This change once again shocked York. He had a new doubt in his heart. Could it be that she really wasn't a vampire? But when the professor left, she revealed the burn marks on her hand. That's when York realized that her power was too strong. She had no fear of these ordinary religious objects. Due to York's recent madness, Amy directly kicked him out. After returning to the apartment, York searched for relevant information, and unexpectedly saw that self-portrait. It was a famous historical figure, Countess Elizabeth from the Middle Ages. She was also the earliest human to be turned into a vampire. According to legend, only by consuming the blood of a virgin, on the night of the full moon, could one regain their human form. Coincidentally, vampire hunter Pete was in this town. As time went by, he had aged significantly. Luckily, he still remembered York. He agreed to join forces with him to fight vampires again. The group gathered once again, but Jerry seemed to have anticipated it. She was waiting for them directly on the subway. Pete saw her, and once again fled the scene. He ran away just before the doors closed. Only York, Eddie, and Amy remained. They had to confront the vampire queen directly. Eddie took the first action. He showed a photo of a cross on his phone. Unfortunately, the cyber god could only save androids. Jerry directly grabbed his neck. Taking advantage of the opportunity, York forcefully stabbed the professor's eye with the cross pendant. Eddie followed up with a punch. Make that cross pendant stab in completely. Meanwhile, Amy pressed the emergency brake. She opened the car door. They both jumped out of the car to escape. Poor Eddie. He ended up being the professor's meal. The two of them ran along the tunnel. Suddenly, they discovered the entrance to a drainage pipe, so they went inside directly. The underground passage was complex. They almost managed to escape. However, the professor found them using ultrasound. Just at the last moment of their escape, Jerry caught up with them. Amy's leg was severely injured. Luckily, there was a church here. Elizabeth had just entered it. Her whole body started emitting white smoke. She could ignite at any moment. In this way, the two of them narrowly escaped. Nevertheless, Jerry discovered that Amy was the person she had been searching for centuries. The two of them took a taxi to the airport, attempting to escape the city, but the professor was already waiting for them on the way. She didn't avoid the speeding vehicles. She collided head-on. Even more surprisingly, the professor didn't move. The taxi flipped over. Amy was directly taken away. Due to Pete's escape, Eddie was killed by the vampire. By this time, he had also turned into a vampire. He pursued them to a bar. He wanted to personally deal with the bastard, while the other person had a cross tattoo. Instead of getting revenge, he was beaten up. Coincidentally, York also arrived, seeking Pete's help. Pete didn't give a clear answer, but he told him, if the vampire is killed before dawn, those who were turned that day will recover. York, who left the tavern fully armed, rushed into the castle. The first person he encountered was Eddie, because he was abandoned by the two in the subway. Eddie also held a grudge, and beat York up, but York took advantage of the opportunity, and poured holy water into his mouth. As a result, Eddie's abdomen exploded into pieces. Meanwhile, Jerry appeared. She grabbed York by his clothes, and threw him into the blood pool. Amy had already turned into a vampire inside. The two of them instantly started fighting, but York didn't want to harm Amy. He was bitten as well. He was about to become a vampire. To completely foil Elizabeth's plan, he stabbed a wooden stake into his own heart, because their lives were intertwined. Amy's blood vessels bulged all over her body. Her skin turned purple. She was about to die. The hope of 1,000 years was right in front of Jerry, but it could only be shattered. The professor let out a howl. But York's heart was slightly to the right. That strike didn't truly pierce his heart. Thanks to his vampire physiology, his injuries instantly healed. Seeing his plan could continue, Elizabeth handed the wooden stake to Amy, but right at that moment, a long sword pierced her from behind. It turned out to be Pete, but they were still vampires, which meant the professor was still alive. As expected, she emerged from Pete's shadow, transformed into the most primal form of a vampire. Daylight was about to break. If she wasn't dealt with soon, the two of them would truly become vampires. York used ultrasonic waves to shatter the surrounding glass. The intense sunlight killed the vampire queen. The two of them killed the professor at the last moment. They successfully turned back into humans. The movie ends here. The Fright Night 2 is the sequel to the 2011 film Fright Night. The plot of the entire film is almost the same as the first one, while the handling of certain scenes is more meticulous. Overall, it is a decent film. Thank you all for watching. If you like my channel, please give me a subscription. The boy was beaten up and robbed. He could only run away, but then he encountered a vampire, and died after being drained of blood by the vampire. The whole incident started with his friend didn't go to the movies with him. Because of this, the boy harbored hatred towards his friend. Even if he turned into an evil spirit, he would never let him go. The boy's friend is named York. At this moment, his motorcycle broke down on the road again. Fortunately, his home wasn't far from here. He got off and started pushing the motorcycle. The neighbor's older sister teased him, but he flirted with her instead. Coincidentally, his mom saw this scene. York argued back. He was just reading that line, but his mom reminded him not to forget that he had a girlfriend, especially Amy. Such an outstanding girl. York felt even more embarrassed. He could only lower his head and busy himself to make his mother stop worrying unnecessarily. Seeing his motorcycle broke down again. Right at that moment, Amy drove up and stopped in front of York. She smiled and invited him to get in the car, but just as York was about to act tough, Amy simply drove away. York realized that he still had classes today. He hurried and ran after her. Amy was just teasing him. She stopped not far away and waited for him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the town, the boy heard the dogs barking loudly in the room. He quickly ran over to check. Inside the bedroom, both parents were killed, and their throats were torn open. There were no signs of intense struggle at the scene. What exactly was it that could kill two adults swiftly? Before he could think much, he heard footsteps again. Clearly, the killer hadn't left. The boy quickly hid under the bed. He reached into his father's pocket beside him and pulled out a handgun. Under the bed, he loaded bullets into the magazine. Right at that moment, father's body suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a pool of blood. Stimulated by the blood, he dropped a piece from his hand, and it rolled right into the bloodstain. He wanted to quickly retrieve it, but a pale hand picked up the piece first. It was definitely not a human hand. The handgun without the missing piece became useless. The boy knew he was doomed. He hid under the bed, praying. The pounding of his heartbeat became the countdown to his death. The next moment, the entire bed was lifted. A figure stared at him. The boy was dragged away and became a meal for the monster. In the school classroom, the teacher was taking attendance. But recently, more and more students were absent. A third of the entire class is missing. But he didn't say anything, because strange things have been happening in the town recently. People have been disappearing one after another. The police are also helpless in dealing with it. After class, Ed invited York to watch a movie together. He initially wanted to refuse, but Ed had something to blackmail him with. A bunch of his embarrassing photos. If York didn't want to be ridiculed for stepping into school tomorrow, then it would be best to go tonight. York could only compromise. He didn't want Amy to know about those foolish things. Returning home after school, York's mother is chatting with the new neighbor, Jerry, but the atmosphere is a bit hot. Jerry is only wearing a vest. His muscular physique is perfectly displayed. His handsome face exudes a mix of hormones. York thinks he ruined his mom's good chance. Amy is also teasing on the side. Their presence quickly made the mother calm down. She just said the drainage was broken, and asked the neighbor Jerry for help in fixing it. Seeing the look in York's eyes, Mother and Jerry both interrupted him. That's how the topic ended. But the two of them exchanged glances. Both of them noticed everything. After seeing Jerry off, both of them started teasing. This conversation didn't last long. York was reminded by Ed. Only 10 minutes left. His embarrassing photos would appear on the school forum. There was no other choice. He could only rush over. Finally arrived within the limit time. The meeting place Ed arranged wasn't at his own house. It was at the house of the missing friend. Just in the past few days, their entire family went missing. Even the police were helpless. Ed claimed to know the culprit. It was the new neighbor of York, according to Ed, and he said he had video evidence. York believed that Ed must be crazy. He had just interacted with that man. He thought he was handsome and charismatic. His demeanor and speech were polite. He must be a well-educated person. How could he be the culprit of the serial disappearances? York saw in Ed's backpack. All of them were hammers and chisels. York couldn't help but doubt. Why would he carry so many weapons? Ed gave a perfunctory explanation. That Jerry is a vampire. He carries them for self-defense. All of this can be proven through videos in his house. York's suspicion grew even stronger. Why did the other person keep insisting on going to his house? The more he doubted, the more York felt that Ed was suspicious. Finally, he even said that Ed watched too many movies and had been brainwashed by those things. This is reality, not the movie Twilight. Vampires don't exist at all. Anyone who believes is a fool. And then he walked away without looking back. Unable to convince York, Ed went back home alone. He was robbed on his way back. His backpack was stolen. While fleeing in panic, he happened to stumble into Jerry's house. Seeing the food delivered to him, Jerry smirked sinisterly. Looking at that malicious smile, Ed quickly took out a crucifix pendant. But it was just a small pendant. It couldn't stop Jerry at all. Just like when the great demons descend upon the mortal world, the most important symbol is an inverted cross. Even Jesus had to carry the cross and run. The next day, York noticed that Ed was also absent from class. He remembered what Ed had told him last night. Doubts arose in his heart. Could it be that what he said was true? So, after school, he decided to visit Ed's house and investigate. From Ed's parents, he learned that Ed had left early. So, how could he be absent from school? York made an excuse to go upstairs and look for books. Searching for new clues, it was here. He saw the evidence Ed mentioned. There were several video recordings. The vehicles were self-driving in the videos. The trash cans would tip over automatically. It looked very eerie, but the audio inside said, "He is right there, clearly visible, but not visible in the recordings." York also saw the vampire information Ed had collected. It clearly stated, vampires cannot be reflected in mirrors. In an instant, he completely believed there really was a vampire living next door. York, who knew the truth, rushed back home. He happened to encounter Jerry. Knowing the other person's true identity, York's voice trembled, but he remembered what Ed had said before. Vampires must obtain consent to enter someone's home. So, York quickly entered the house. Jerry noticed the other's reaction and guessed that he already knew his identity, but he wanted to test it by complimenting the home decor and offering helpful statements, trying to gain permission to enter. But York always hurriedly refused. He even quickly withdrew his hand when passing things. This unreasonable attitude clearly showed York's stance. Jerry knew there was nothing he could do for now. He could only leave a few harsh words, warning him to watch out for Amy and his mother. The threatening tone in his words was evident. Then he left. After seeing Jerry off, only then did York remember. He had a date with Amy tonight. So, he rushed upstairs. After meeting Amy, they started passionately kissing. In the heat of the moment, York suddenly felt something was wrong. It turned out Jerry was downstairs, staring at his room, being targeted by this guy. Almost instantly, he jumped back suddenly, trying to escape the other's gaze, but his unusual reaction made Amy feel like York was brushing her off. She angrily grabbed her bag and left, and that became a rift between them. York couldn't sleep until midnight. He had long experienced the terrifying nature of women. He wondered how to comfort Amy tomorrow. When he was in distress, a piercing scream pulled him back from his thoughts. He looked toward the source of the sound. It was actually coming from Jerry's house. Since he already knew something was wrong with the other person, York seized the opportunity to find the police and investigate Jerry's background. However, due to the recent string of disappearances, the police obviously didn't want to stir up trouble. They just asked Jerry a few perfunctory questions. They didn't even enter the house, and concluded that everything was fine, and left immediately. Seeing the police being unreliable, York was also disappointed. Indeed, relying on heaven and earth was not as reliable as relying on oneself. Taking advantage of Jerry's absence, York learned on-site lockpicking skills in an attempt to open Jerry's door, but clearly, he didn't have that talent. In the end, he relied on the spare key placed in the yard to enter. However, shortly after he entered, Jerry returned. If Jerry caught him, he would certainly meet a fatal end. York hid inside a cupboard. To his surprise, he discovered a secret passage. From there, he arrived at the basement and saw the person imprisoned by Jerry. He wanted to show off the lockpicking skills he just learned, but then he heard Jerry's footsteps. He quickly hid in the nearby empty room. Through the crack in the door, York witnessed a horrifying scene. Jerry bit through the woman's neck. Blood splattered all over the floor. The woman's voice faded away as she pleaded. When Jerry left, York went over to check again. He discovered that the woman was still alive. He decided to rescue her. So, while evading Jerry outside, they slowly approached the main door. But they didn't know Jerry had already noticed them. He was playing a cat-and-mouse game with them all along, deliberately letting them out of the house. Now it was already morning. The woman thought she was about to start a new life when she saw the sunlight, but as soon as they stepped outside, there was a sudden explosion, and she turned into ashes, completely disappearing from the world. Jerry, who was watching all of this from the room, revealed a smile. He enjoyed the thrill of tormenting others. Witnessing the woman vanish in an instant, York also became wary of the sunlight. He hid in the room, blocking out any trace of light, not letting even a ray of light through. He couldn't figure out how to deal with Jerry. The gap between them was too significant. It really feels like a game of cat and mouse. York can only be Jerry's plaything. The only thing I can do is to prevent his mother from interacting with Jerry, and certainly not invite him inside. However, York's mother just thinks he's mentally unstable, driven by fear of Jerry. York searches online for ways to deal with him. That's when he comes across a name: Vampire Hunter Pete. He sees a glimmer of hope. He takes a flight to find him, but upon arrival, he discovers that this Pete is just an actor. Everything is just part of a script. He's not even as good as a magician. Even though Pete is a fraud, his collection is genuine. York wants to seek his assistance, but all he offers are foolish suggestions, like turning vampires into giant egg rolls. Pete cuts him off and has his assistant kick him out. York, with no gains from the encounter, once again, he faces the onset of dusk. There's no good solution. York can only rely on divine intervention. He returns home. He starts making crosses. The entire room is filled with crosses. On the other side, Jerry, who has been waiting all day. First, he kills 2 people on the street to satisfy his hunger. Then he heads straight to the next door. Upon hearing Jerry's voice, York is terrified out of his wits. He pleads with his mother not to let Jerry inside. Jerry, outside the door, naturally hears, but he only smiles. He retreats into the shadows. Just when everyone thinks he's leaving, unexpectedly, Jerry starts digging in the yard. It turns out that after all the helpfulness over these days, he has learned the pipeline routes in York's house. He accurately digs out a gas pipeline. He guides a flame along the pipeline, causing a direct explosion. Of all the gas appliances in York's house, the entire house is blown apart. With no home left, there's no need for permission. Jerry calmly chases after the 3 of them. He even performs a strong brick-throwing act. He throws York's dilapidated motorcycle several hundred meters, smashing it into their car. The 3 of them press the accelerator to the floor, but they find Jerry standing in front of them. They steel themselves and crash directly into him, but Jerry is completely unharmed. He even lies beneath the car and punches through the chassis, holding down the brakes, then flips the entire car. These are things beyond human capability. Only now do York's mother and Amy believe that Jerry is a vampire, but it's already too late. They have nowhere to retreat. They can only face him head-on. York takes out the cross he made, hoping to intimidate him, but Jerry just smiles. He grabs the cross directly and burns it to ashes. Jerry grabs York directly. Luckily, York's mother pierced Jerry's body with a road sign, saving York. York unexpectedly receives a call from Pete, who wants to help him voluntarily. Before they can start discussing the details, Pete receives a call. A late-night delivery arrives at the door. York casually remarks that they don't deliver packages at night where he's from. They should really learn from here. Before he can finish, Pete realizes something is wrong. At that moment, Ed, who has turned into a vampire, enters. He casually mocks them, calling them idiots. Before he can even make a move, Pete runs away. Ed quickly chases after him. Not only does he fail to catch up, but he also gets his arm caught in the door. On the other side, with Ed chasing Pete, York and the other person try to take the opportunity to escape, but they are cornered by Jerry, who arrived from downstairs. To save their lives, they pick up nearby objects and fight. Amy fires several shots at him, but she is told that silver bullets are for werewolves. Then she splashes holy water at Jerry, but that's for demons. It doesn't work on vampires. However, they manage to escape during this brief opportunity. Just when they thought they had escaped, and weren't happy for a moment, they are scattered by a crowd. When they meet again, Amy has already been turned into a vampire. Jerry turns back and mocks York, saying he can't protect anything, and can only watch the people around him die. York became furious, and sought out Pete. He obtained specialized tools to counter vampires, from Pete's numerous collections. Afterward, they prepared themselves and set off. Taking advantage of the daylight, they broke into Jerry's house, but there, he encountered Pete. They were about to engage in a fierce battle. In the next moment, they were overwhelmed by a group of vampires, gasping for breath under a sliver of sunlight. Watching as the sun gradually set, their fate of death quietly approached. It was now their last chance, and if they didn't give it their all, they would have no opportunity left. York sets himself on fire. He tackles the opponent without hesitation. The fire seems to have no effect on him. Jerry, who was tackled by him, has a painful expression on his face. He crashes around with York. He wants to throw him down. During this time, the flames melt his skin, revealing a fatal spot, his heart. Taking advantage of this opportunity, York stabs him with a wooden spike. Jerry instantly explodes into countless pieces. The people he controlled also return to their original state. The film ends here. The film Fright Night is a 2011 movie. It is adapted from the 1985 version of the film Fright Night. From a Western perspective, it tells a humorous story of battling supernatural creatures and upholding righteousness. It provides viewers with a unique viewing experience. It is an excellent light comedy horror film, perfect for relaxing and watching during leisure time. That concludes the story for this episode. Rated out of 10 points. What score would you give this film? Please leave your answers in the comments section. If you enjoy my channel, please consider subscribing.